So this is your, if you want a pointer, the top part. I realized everybody was looking. Well, if it works. Yeah, I don't want to do it. Sometimes this is the final session of today. Let's start. The final session of today is a presentation by Abderrahim Kassou. I want to make sure that I do it right. Talking about architecture and social housing in Morocco. After that, we will do a question and answer period, and because we didn't do any discussion this morning, I would like to prepare two things. One is that all the speakers that spoke this morning as well as this afternoon come up front. It means we probably don't have enough chairs, but we'll sort of work out how to, where everybody sits. And secondly, I hope that you remember all the questions you had since 9 o'clock this morning, and that we really can have a very substantial discussion, because I think some very interesting points have been raised by the variety of different speakers, both in terms of their commonality as well as in their diversity. So with that, let's start with Mr. Kassou.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I'm the last speaker, and I hope that you kept some energy for me. First, I would like to thank the organizers, the Komomo, and also and the university, and also to dedicate this presentation to the president of the Komomo Morocco, architect Ahmed Hadiri, who passed away a month ago. So this is a thought of him. My presentation is two times. First, I hope not to be too much out of the topic, because I'm going to present Casablanca and our work as a non-profit independent organization. So we're not researchers, we're not teachers, we're not, architects myself, but we're not part of the university. And our work on field, and then focus and zoom on the social housing architecture. So very quickly, Casablanca is a very old city. We all have the image that it's a new city. It's a very old city, but it was demolished by an earthquake in the 18th century. So there's this amazing old pattern or old fabric with all the buildings are, the oldest buildings are from the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. So we have this mix of the old town with very modern, in-sense building with balconies, with windows, etc. So this kind of mix between, we know the images of the Medinas, Morocco, Fez, Marrakesh, etc. This in Casablanca has this very specific aspect of traditional urban fabric, but with the modern, let's say, facades. And one of the top examples is this is the same neighborhood with the synagogue, a mosque, and the church, in like 200 meters one from the other, which is something that we in those times need to remember. The plot drawing Casablanca is well known as the Mecca of the Art Deco. Very few views, because I guess all of you know the Casablanca, the movie, which was done in Hollywood. There's no image from Casablanca, the city, on the movie, so that's just to correct some of the images. And welcome to see the real Casablanca. As a few years ago, some students from Colombia came to Casablanca. Actually, some of the friends are here that can talk about that. It was a very interesting studio. The central back, very rapid overview of some of the Art Deco amazing examples that you can see that are still standing in the city. And that's not the center of the topic. I just wanted to have like the context that we were talking about. And also some amazing modern buildings where a lot of research on how to make housing better, how to give light and air to internal housing in the 30s. And this is one of the amazing buildings of the 48, 17 floors. Starting talking about modern architecture, this still exists, the Volvo garage. This is an aerogare, a small airport in Casablanca that still exists. And some demolitions, some of the main buildings not exist anymore, you cannot see them anymore. like this one of the first buildings in the world of the Auguste Perret, and one of the first buildings in concrete, actually. The municipal theater that was also demolished. The Hotel Enfa, where part of the meeting between Roosevelt, De Gaulle, and Churchill was held in '43, that was demolished as well. The biggest swimming pool in Africa, 300 meters long and 90 meters wide, demolished as well. And the bull ring of Casablanca, one of the few bull rings of Africa, demolished as well. Cinema of 2,500 seats with open roof, 1935, demolished as well. And not to be to stop in this bad atmosphere awareness. Of course, all of you know this book. Casa Mémoire, as a non-profit organization, exists since, well, for 15 years now, so it was created before that book. The book was of Jean-Luc Cohen and Monique Caleb, was published in 1998, and it was also occasion to organize a large exhibition in Paris, Bordeaux, and Casablanca in 2000. And for us, there's before a book and after a book. Even if there's kind of small group of people that working on preserving architecture, this book gave us like the serious background that we needed. It's not only few people, there are serious people that publish serious book saying that there is architecture in Casablanca. And one of the main work we do is just to organize guided tours. I mean, just walk through the city and learn how to read the city, how to look to the city, for local people, for residents, for visitors, for students, etc. Organizing also lots of conferences, lectures. This one is called what we call, how can I translate that? The Popular University of Heritage, that we organized in a trade union headquarters within the old Medina, old city of Casablanca, kind of bringing also the serious topics as heritage, but also in very uncommon spaces. So it's a way of bringing people to this topic, but also bringing new public to some of the buildings. So for us, it's a way to make them known, and make them preserved. Producing maps and documents, because we are in Morocco, there is only 2 schools of architecture. History of architecture is not taught in university. Ministry of Culture and Ministry of Tourism, let's not talk too much about them. So we are doing, like, in our way, the document that can help preserving and I mean, just preparing documents like maps or like books, a guide or this book on Italian architecture of Morocco is a way of knowing that we are not specialists, we're not historians, but we know that we stop at the surface of the subject, but still, it's a way for us to give like a material or depth to this issue. Also organizing some activities that's more while this is 6 months ago, that building of 1925 was demolished, to organize a sitting to protest, and we also we invited a dancer that did like a farewell dance for the building, while the building was demolished. It's kind of silly activities we're doing. The Heritage Days that we organize, since this is the fourth edition next weekend. So it's more bring people to visit, and it's thousands and thousands of people, and bring theater, music, workshop with kids in the streets, and organize guided visits in areas that are presumed to be dangerous, or to be, I mean, people don't go to walk there. So this is in old Medina, in the area where it's some of the famous drug dealers are there. So it's nice to visit it for other purposes from time to time. And quickly, it's the slaughterhouse, this is slaughterhouse that was built in 1922, closed in 2002, and we're leading a coalition of artistic organizations to occupy the site. And for 2 years now, we organize activities and events in this slaughterhouse, what we call the cultural factory, which is the first example of this kind in the undeveloped country, let's say, or in the so-called Arab world. And this is also a way for us, of course, to preserve the building, but by tackling this issue of culture, of access to public to culture, etc. Back to the labor class, which is the main topic of our discussion. Of course, you know that this Casablanca is well known by the bidonville. Apparently, even the name bidonville was invented in Casablanca, according to some historians. So this is one of the main slums, Carrière Centrale, which exists since 1920 in the east of Casablanca. And you see in the back all the big factories that create this slaughterhouse. So this is a document from Ecochar's book that present the difference between the population, the local population, which is in like traditional dress, let's say, and their physical occupancy of the site. So you can see for this is like locals, like us. This is Europeans. You can see the difference, and here the population and the space occupied by the local population, and here you can see in the 50s the population and the black spaces are the space. So you can see the deficit of housing, of social housing. And in 1953, it's around 140,000 inhabitants that needs a proper house. And this is still an issue in Morocco. We're still having a lot of slums and lots of this is still continuity in these topics. There are mainly two main answers to this. First answer is this kind of, although it is kind of pushing to call that social housing, but it is because it was to densify the old town and to build, this was built by Cadet Brion, French architect, on a design of master plan of Laprade, which is, the idea is that we're building for Muslim local Arabs, so we need to build something that looks like how we imagine their housing is, which is just fake imagination, but it's almost well done. And this is other examples of those large projects done by private companies. Up is done by Compagnie Lafarge, which is the largest private company for cement for the workers, and above it's kind of coalition of several companies, sugar company, electricity company, etc., that built this kind of closed old town in the middle of the 30s. So this is one of the answer. The second answer, obviously, is this work that you all know of Ecochar, the 8x8 grid, and also you can see this is the 8x8 grid. So each family has a square of 64 square meters, and this is the Cité Verticale of Candelis, Josik and Woods. We saw earlier the example of those architects in France, and this is those blocks now. So now it's high-rise building. This is very interesting because those squares empty leave kind of public space. And I don't want to focus on this architecture, because I think that's quite known as example. I want more focused on how we deal with that now. This is 1953, Nida Bay, Candelis, Josik and Woods, and this is now the same building. So somebody was talking about preservation, how to preserve, etc. All what you have in mind is this, and the reality is this. And we deal with this and not with this as actors in the field. And this maybe you can discuss. This is a better image of this. So you can still read the pattern or the pattern of the old thing, but this is other issue. But still, I mean, still also have continuity, and we cannot, by working on this, just deny this. And this is the challenge. Semiramis, other example, just in the same area. Hensch and Studer example, and Sidi Atman, very amazing architecture. That's more complicated to close, so it was changed a little bit, as you see here and here. But I mean, you can recognize the original shape of the building. Dubs D58, which is very interesting because it's the first large operation of social housing done by Moroccan architects just after the independence of '56, and you can see the continuity of the architecture. And for us, it's clear that the political changes like '56 as independence has nothing to do with architectural change for us. When you study the city, or at least Casablanca, the change in the architecture are more in the 70s, and before it's the 40s. 40s because we had how you say in French, débarquement, of the American army. So in terms of architecture, there's big influence between before 42 and after 42. And 42, more or less, is kind of change in terms of architecture. And then the other change is more in the 70s. And so our work actually is how this can become a heritage, because this is not, we're talking about architecture that's not as cute as wants to be the common taste. So it's more complicated. So basically, coming to basic, make it visited. So the basic is start with the basics. So the next weekend is the Heritage Days in Casablanca. So welcome if you're around. So one of the visits that I organize is just buses to take people to visit those areas. I mean, just before talking about them, just make people organize visit to them. And there's a full day for school, and 3,000 kids are going to be next Friday there. It's going to be a nightmare. 3,000 kids taken in this area. I don't know how many will come back. That's another issue. Some of you may have visited or heard about this large exhibition in Berlin, in the Desert of Modernity. It was organized like 4 years ago. And so this exhibition, especially focusing on those experiences of architecture in North Africa. So we bring this experience in Morocco. We bring this exhibition. Actually, we still have it in Casablanca. And we organize it in the slaughterhouse that you see. In one of the area, actually, the slaughterhouse is like 500 meters from Candilis experience project. So you see some of the local people that are not. You know, the main difficulty is to have people that are not the people that are used to go to architectural exhibition, very specific, specialized. 5 people in Casablanca that will understand those panels. And we did also publish a kind of booklet, and with also some of the debates. This is photo of one of them that we organized with College of Architecture. This guy is the president of the College of Architecture. We can recognize Monica Leb also, and also the Federation of the Real Estate Companies, to discuss some the main issue discussed in this was how come there was large experiences in social housing in the 50s, in the 60s. Now we are like 50 years after. And how come nobody works on this experience to learn from this experience? And we're like starting from scratch. We are facing a large deficit of social housing. Morocco is building like 40,000 units a year, which is enormous for an ongoing country. And with not the same generosity in terms of public space, with not the same, I mean, the public space is like the left space when you build the units. And the idea is to have this discussion with the professional, with the real estate companies, etc., and to see what happened. For now, there's not a lot of results, but we hope that it's gonna work. It's important also to enlarge for us in terms of we have a very pragmatic method to say, okay, if we focus on public housing, we cannot succeed because it's too specific, too specialist. It doesn't look like it was. So we have to put it in a large packet of heritage of a neighborhood. So in that case, we're working on this. Sorry. On this nice end of the 50s building, very common architecture, but we're working on it on another aspect, because the basement of that building was a secret jail of the dictatorship of Hassan II. So more than 1,500 people was tortured here. So we're working on this memory of that space by organizing movie. This is the entrance of the jail, of the basement. And so we're organizing like a movie show of documentary of this period of dictatorship on the facade of the building. So organizing discussion on with some of the victims, but also, of course, a discussion on heritage and how this can be perceived as memory, as heritage. So this is one of the aspects that can enlarge the perception. We're talking about architecture, we're talking about modernity in somehow, we're talking about heritage, but in maybe another way. This is a work we're just finishing in this area. we're talking about. This is East Casablanca. This is the slaughterhouse. This is Candelis and Woos project, and this is other heritage elements of this neighborhood. And basic idea was to work on the neighborhood, heritage of this neighborhood, Hay Mohammadi, and to select. We published actually a book, a historical book on this area, Arabic. And once the translation is ready, I'm going to send it to you. And the idea was to, okay, we're going to publish a map on heritage. Like you see, there's 40 elements. But it took us 2 years to do that, because for us, it's not about doing a map. It's about the process of doing a map. So the thing that we did is to organize a meeting with people, several communities, kids, youngsters, all people, etc., to say, okay, we have money to put some signage in the building. This building was built, whatever, etc. But we have only money for 20 signage. So you decide which 20 we have to select. And then the fight starts. I want this building, I want this building, etc. And this discussion that we create on the area, you see which are the 10 buildings that everybody agreed on, like the jail, for example, like the slaughterhouse, like the cinema of the area, the cinema hall of the area, like soccer stadium of the area. Candelis is nobody mentioned it, and because we had a veto, we put it in the list. And it's ended by this kind of map and this kind of selected building. You have this Candelis building, but also some soccer match and very diverse activity. This is a grave of victims of a riot in '81, but also this is a source of water when there was no water in the area. So very kind of a heritage. So this is published, and it's not about publishing this map. It's more about having the discussion on heritage taking place in the area, in this neighborhood. Because as I was saying, I mean, in conclusion, our method is very pragmatic method. If you focus on social housing, we're gonna lose, because it's not Art Deco, it's not Art Nouveau, it's not like cute decorated building that you can have the common people can understand that's heritage. This is more for very specialist, crazy people, and we have to put it in a package with other things, and then we can save it, preserve it as heritage of a given area. The second thing is not for us. It's not about preserving some building because of by law, even if you have a heritage law very inspired from the French law, which is inscription, classement, etc. It doesn't really work for us. It's more like raising awareness of community regarding those buildings, and that's the way we work. While working with communities, with schools, etc., etc. And finally, this discussion about what to preserve. This building, for example, has been completely changed. It's not anymore the Candelis building. For us, this debate, we prefer to postpone it, because, I mean, we believe that what those buildings becomes is as important as what those buildings were. This needs to be studied by sociologists, by anthropologists, how it becomes that way, what does it change, etc. But this needs time, and for the moment, we need to preserve them, and then we'll see. Thank you.
This is the last presentation, and so we have some time left for discussion, and I would like to ask all the speakers, including for this morning, and as you can see, we do not have enough chairs, so it will be a little bit informal in the discussion, but I hope that we can sort of talk about all the issues that have been proposed to us in the last, 7 to 8 hours, in terms of how and why should we preserve public housing. So may I invite all the speakers to come up, and hopefully we can start our questions. Can we have the lights, please? A little more, please. Thank you. I realize this is the end of the day, but hopefully we can still make this an interesting dialogue. I think we all have to talk very loudly so we can hear when your questions come in. But my first question really would be to Elizabeth, and which is, she was one of the first speakers this morning, and has what you've seen throughout today changed your mind?
Okay. Well, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed all of the talks today. And I guess one of the things that is hopeful to me is that I don't think anyone feels like the preservation of their public housing is a massive cause celeb in your country, but everybody is working on it. And I think that it's a little bit heartening, but then also I think it's exciting to have met you all, and I think that I hope that we can work forward from this. But that is one of my observations. And then I guess when I think about our public housing issues, they're so tied up with politics, and it becomes so difficult that is something that I think is obviously not unique to housing, but is particularly complicated in housing, and everyone has those same issues, and I think that's a really interesting observation.
But everybody stayed clear of it, except you. You talked about politics.
Yes.
Well.
And what's the change?
What is the change?
Mm-hmm. Because most of us think of Holland as a social democratic country.
Sorry to...
Tolerant and social democratic.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah,
sort of the
yeah.
conception. Wooden shoes, steel bread.
Oh, that's really difficult. Well, I can only tell you what's happening, and the thing is that the whole land lease system in Amsterdam was a very good system when the welfare state was being built up, so to speak. But nowadays, we are collectively some sort of property owners and property developers. So our socialist aldermen, they behave like property developers, and they know exactly how to do that, and they internalize that logic and rationality, which is quite destructive to this post-war built legacy that brought us this wealth and welfare in the first place. Some say, well, don't be nostalgic about it. This was just the first wave, post-war housing. Now it's time to harvest. You reap the land, and you build a better housing stock. So, and we can do that now in a different way, because the issues of social housing has changed from the 50s and 60s to now. It's very different. But I mean, I'm only venting positions, arguments that are being used in the debate. I tend to... Well, what happened in the Western Garden cities, for instance, is that all these housing corporations got together, and they made a huge company, an investment company called Far West, very American pioneering spirit. And when you imagine that the Western Garden cities is as big as a midtown a place like Amersfoort or Delft in Holland, this company controls the whole redevelopment of the Western Garden cities. Not controlled democratically, etc., etc. So, in that sense, it's good we have the crisis now, because the Far West investment company collapsed and has been dissolved, so we can rethink the way how to redevelop this city. So that's yeah. So my position is the crisis is a blessing in disguise.
Any questions? I mean, I started this off because it's always hard to start it off, but anyone from the floor, any issues? Andrew? Yes, sir.
Follow up on that. I didn't quite, I understood that you said that the housing now is being... Can you hear? All right, that's better.
I understood that you said that the housing now it's not by the government, it's private sector development. But how about, does that mean that all the people that live there are paying their own rent? Are they subsidized by the way that it's paid for? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a mixed economy, the Dutch economy, and so by law, when you have social rent or rent control, the state then distributes the houses, even though they are now owned by these housing corporations, which are independent corporations. And even private homeowners have to deal with this system. That's probably unthinkable here. The trick is the land lease system, because you get a lease for, say, 50 years, and it's exactly, of course, the amount of time that we have the listing procedures, and that now these neighborhoods have been, they need how do you call that? Renovation, refurbishment. So these leases need to be renegotiated. If you densify the districts, if you build bigger houses, if you build more houses, houses with higher rents, the city will demand higher leases. And that's why the city holds the housing corporations under control. And you get this whole system of negotiating, and everybody makes money with this. So the city makes money when you demolish and build anew, and the housing corporations too, because they can raise rents, etc., etc. So the land lease system, which used to work very well under the classic welfare state circumstances, now makes us property developers and think as property developers. Even though these are private companies, etc., it's a hybrid, and it's incredibly interconnected.
Yes, I just wanted to give an example, because the example I showed was from an area that's still popular, but in other areas, this neighborhood or the social housing are now in a neighborhood that's more like where people want to go to live, actually. So there is kind of pressure on this area. For those of you who know Cité Plateau, which is a social housing built in '54 by Joubert, there is a large project of public company to demolish everything, to do, like a proper development, nice and clean one. And because of all we're doing, they just call us to say, okay, guys, we have this area, we have several blocks of several bars. For you, we're gonna preserve one. Choose which one. So it was, why us? How can you choose one? And why us? And especially in a country where this responsibility should be, why not choosing one? Why not? But is it to a private, independent organization to take this decision? Is it not to the city or the Ministry of Culture? Why not preserving one as an example? But who has to take this decision? This one or not that one? Or don't touch, or you can touch?
I'd like to say that from a Scottish perspective, we don't really feel very sorry for the Netherlands, because they have, no, I'm not saying that. You have such an advanced system that's set up as a model for other Western European countries like ours. And I think one of the important things that we have to realise, I think that conservation has done a very good job through DocMomo and individuals, pioneering individuals, to take on board the kind of set pieces, the top end elite architectural productions by named architects. These are being listed sometimes on a very large scale in the Netherlands, sometimes less so in other countries. And what we really need to think about is not these one-offs, but to actually talk about how we value the broader environment. And I think the Dutch example of having even the lowest level of protection is a good way of looking at it. Now, in my country and in England, there is just listing, and there's everything else. So to not list something is to give it no value. So that pushes it aside. So that's where I think that documentation and survey it's really the only way forward. And also these fantastic housing museums, the Chicago example, I thought, where you have kind of top-down survey work, but you also have bottom-up local residents working to record their environment in the way that they want to. And I think, you know, listings perhaps really just now is not the way forward.
But somewhere the ownership question comes in here. I mean, you're talking about the lease. How is that in Georgia? Is there an ownership issue? Is it collective? Is it privately owned? How does that relate to any preservation or survey effort?
Actually, since 1992, everything has become privatized. And that's the kind of a distinctive case in the post-Soviet space, because in other countries, for example in Russia, they didn't privatize all the properties, but the municipalities and they have retained the properties and they put the price for privatization. So even now there are a lot of tenants who are still paying the rent and they are not able to buy those apartments from the government. In our case, it was just like overnight, for free, you own where you live. And that has dramatically changed the situation, because now we're talking about public housing and so-called social housing, but we are facing an army of homeowners who were tenants before. And then it changed when it became about preservation policies or refurbishments or collective responsibility for the public environment. Then it's a different challenge. In that sense, it becomes difficult for us to talk about preservation of these buildings, because if the owners decide, then they have the...
But the common theme seems to be that with privatization, collective spaces do not get maintained. Is that the same thing in France? I mean, is that for you the same?
I just want to adjust something about the example of La Grand-Mare of this morning, because it interesting me beside of the other examples. La Grand-Mare, when I was at the commission during when it was threatened on three blocks demolished by the city, and one of the arguments of the people who wanted demolition is as it was a prototype before, why to keep all the 25 blocks? We just have to keep one prototype, and it's okay. It's
sounds like Casablanca.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like Casablanca.
Yeah, but it's more complicated. I didn't explain because we wanted a ZPP zone, protection zone on all the area, but the municipality was the owner of the three blocks who were threatened, and she didn't want to do ZPP. So the solution was a little bit a compromise. We classed in totality one of the block because she had been bought by an architect, and she was okay for doing a total renovation in the spirit of floods. And in France, if you class a monument, you have a circle, 500-meter circles, when you control the architect of the Bâtiment de France, French building architect, have control on this area, and it's the reason why we took this solution. And then there are fatal fires, and also it was too difficult to keep with children who died, and we couldn't keep position to preservation. But 18 blocks had been restored 3 years ago by a social owner, and it was okay.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe just for a moment, take politics out of the realm, because I know it's, sorry.
In an election year?
No, it's hard to take politics out of this discussion, but if we could just for a moment take politics out of the discussion. And I think, Diane, you were the one that mentioned, well, there's so much of this post-war architecture. You have what you call the bespoke, you know, the high style versus the neo-vernacular. But how do we do have to apply, some of us have to apply certain criteria, whether it's local landmarks criteria, whether it's, in our case, National Register criteria. And how do we, and you talked about prototypes, you know, well, we'll pick this one and that one. This is an example of an X plan, a Y plan, 2 slabs going this way, or how do we, no one's really talked about applying criteria so that we can, as managers of the built environment, make decisions on what is significant and have those arguments for significance. And I'm not sure if I get that. I guess the question's about criteria.
Yeah, criteria. Docomomo have been discussing this for a long time, haven't they? There's a committee, I'm on a committee just now, which is about urbanism and landscapes and how you take the traditional criteria of architectural and historical interest and plant that upon a vast town, for a whole town. And it's wrought with difficulties. I mean, one of the ideas is to just do it on a threat base. So when a scheme is under threat, then the traditional conservation approach to say this is by an important architect and you Philistines do not understand this and we're going to chain ourselves to the railings. And sometimes that actually works very well. The problem with trying to find out a criteria, and I think in France and in the Netherlands you've done this, is it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of work. And we tried to do that and the state took money away from us because it takes so long. You have about 7 sets of criteria and then at that point everybody just falls asleep. So maybe it's better to just say, I think this is very important, shut up and let's try and save it. I don't know. I don't know, it could be an approach.
Flavia,
sorry, I'm being a bit fluffy.
I would like to add, Flavia, what is your sense on that?
I think this is a very important issue because this is all about, we're seeing all these examples around the world and what do we choose? And in this sense, there's no way of coming out of politics because preservation is all about building up cultural policies, and applying criteria is all about someone that's saying that something has value of some interest. And so I thought that what Diane said is very interesting because once we broaden our concept of what is a cultural heritage, I mean, since the 70s till now, we keep broadening and broadening. Now we have to deal with it. And so maybe listing and nothing is not an option. Maybe we have like levels of possible ways of preservation and then applying different criteria. And I think this shouldn't be a technical issue exclusively. The residents must be involved in it, and mostly they have a lot of different criteria than the ones that we as architects and whatever have. So maybe it's looking at it a cultural artifact and trying to be as much as complex in the terms of technical ways to looking at each piece and to raise criteria that would never be that broad. I mean, they are specific and in case to case, I guess, and in dealing with the fact that there will be losses.
Rusudan.
I just want to add a few things about the preservation of these examples. As it was already mentioned, do you hear me? Yeah. There are so many these examples that it's just really not possible, first of all, to evaluate them from the expert point of view, and then to list them and apply all these formal preservation strategies. And I think in that context, it's also important to bring in the broader values like environmental consciousness and responsibility, reusing the old buildings. Also, it's a financial issue, and again we come back to this current economic crisis and all the housing bubbles and so on. I mean, before thinking of demolishing, it's not about just look, it's so nice and culturally valuable and so on, but just think twice whether it's worth demolishing and building something new. Whose interest it's serving primarily? Because when we're following the policies like we had before, it's just we're just pushing the poor people away and away from our urban centers and creating new slums-like situations and new urbanities which then appear to have the same problems that we were trying to fight like 5 years before with the new housing plan. So it's just about the rethinking housing policy itself, because only conservationists like we are, we cannot fight for, we can fight for single examples which are most outstanding, but the approaches should be worked together with sociologists and urban planners and economists, and just it's interdisciplinary concern, because after all it's our living environment, we all live in there. Right. So that's it.
Okay. We'll give you 5 more minutes. I think you're talking about the public interest versus the public housing.
I did mention both things separate, distinct, but public interest is essentially preservation of the whole, not public housing necessarily, but preservation of the whole.
But if I may raise the first...
Public is now different, it's a global public.
But I think that I would argue for a second, if I may take prerogative here, is that also that it's, in my mind, is the original intent was to provide shelter and quality of life. And are we, by putting our concerns ahead, really challenging the original premise? I mean, okay, sorry, I confused the issue here, but I think in the discussion, I think, and Jorge also the same question, is that we are talking about our interest as a public into something that is intensely personal in some level. And so how do we deal with this? Anyone trying to answer that global versus private versus social versus what?
I like Kassou's example very much. And there's also when you show the exhibition that traveled to Casablanca, it's I think a fantastic example of well, a global public working with local public. So
I think it's very dialectical problem between we must have both local and global. For instance, La Cité de l'Étoile from Candelis was a very difficult area actually. When we put a process, a classing process, people who live there said, "But you are completely crazy. We are not Château de Versailles, and you want to do from us a ghetto culturel." And they asked to Minister Frédéric Mitterrand to come and visit and see. But even if you have you must change the look of history, and it's a work to do with people to change their perception of their own housing. It's not so easy. And for example, Le Havre was. When I was a child, Le Havre was a symbol of failure of reconstruction. Also Brest. My parents said that it's ugly, this city, why do you visit this? And now with World Heritage of UNESCO, perception has changed. And inside of every inhabitant. And so it's a dialectical.
Yeah, I remember the first time come to Le Havre in 1963, and I hated it. Yeah. And it's clearly how our perception has changed. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question that follows up on that, really. Thanks. I have a question that follows up on that, really. We've talked so much today, and your presentations have been wonderful, about the reasons to preserve public housing. And I wonder if for a minute we could continue on that line of what are the reasons people have to want to demolish it. And one of the reasons is that I hear a lot from people who are in the affordable housing field is they want to get rid of the stigma of the housing. And in order to get rid of the stigma, you have to tear it down. Or you have to at least dilute it by tearing some of it down and making it more mixed income or more mixed use. And I'm wondering who has maybe had success in addressing that idea of stigma with the people who are making decisions about whether to preserve buildings, because whether to preserve public housing, because I think that a lot of the people in the field who are making decisions are starting from that perspective that the stigma is something that it's an economic justice, a social justice issue. You have to get rid of the stigma, and the way to do it is to tear it down.
Isn't that the underlying concept in Hope 6, Elizabeth?
Yeah. You know, I think both Lauderdale Courts and Trumbull are great examples. I mean, Lauderdale Courts is beautiful. I have pictures of, you know, that was the one in Memphis, and, you know, there's posters that say chic and all these sort of things, you know, downtown living, it's public housing. And, I mean, and when you start talking about stigma, you're now talking about public memory, you know, and that's, you know, I'm an architect, and I like to think about buildings in terms of like an investment over an indefinite amount of time, and, you know, public memory is something that can fade, so it's really hard it's hard to see an investment go like that over something that is as transitory as a kind of public memory. And I also think that, you know, I mean, there are cases where something, you know, there are times when something terrible has happened somewhere, and, you know, like, you know, there's sort of a certain mark. But in a lot of cases, it's been misperception. And this misperception has been tied in with, unfortunately, years of under-maintenance, you know, and cleaning something up and making it look better makes a huge difference. You know, mostly when somebody who isn't an architect looks at something, you know, it's paint and it's weeding and pointing and, you know, picking up the garbage and all sorts of things. Those are the things that somebody perceives. And I would proffer that fixing that, mending that, will get us a long way towards changing that perception. But it's hard. It's, you know, it's long, sustained work. You know, I think that Hope 6 has not been a cheap answer, but it was a quick answer. You know, relatively. It was, we're going to tear it down and it's going to be all new. And that's a really sort of easy and quick way to resolve a problem. Maintaining something on the long term seems much more difficult for us as Americans. And I don't know if that's across the board. We're bad at it.
Probably true.
And
sorry.
so, yeah.
Just wanted to add for our case, actually, for Morocco, there's not this relationship with the social housing operation. There's no, I mean, it's not this area where there is crime and traffic, etc. For us, there's crime and traffic everywhere, so it doesn't matter. So it's not like we have like a phobia of. I mean, there's two cases. Or those operations are in an area where there is value, where there is kind of value. So it has to be demolished to build other things. It can be industry, it could be social housing, it could be other any kind of project. Problem is not the relationship with the social housing. Problem is the relationship of some building that's occupied too much land to make it profitable. Or the other thing is those projects are in some areas that has no value, that's still popular, and they're just left by their own. So it's kind of preservation by default. They just preserve because there is no interest there.
There's no money to change it. But is that the same way for Rio? Because you are suggesting there is interest in the preservation by the local inhabitants.
Yeah, I think that's the other way around. Because since UNESCO said that the German blocks, the 6 German blocks, are now worldwide heritage, is that the name?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is happening, I guess, to some of the housing. And the one that I've shown is like people really liked it, and it's hard to preserve. But on the other hand, what might happen is that once it gets really preserved and all the work, the maintenance done, the original people that will live there would be out, and this might happen to some of the housings, and this is the other problem, the problem that we might face, but not demolition, because this rarely happens in a country like Brazil, especially with these blocks, because there are always a lot of land issues involved. Once they were privatized in the 70s during the dictatorship, people bought the apartments, and in all the rest of the spaces, there's huge fights of whose space is owned. So rarely they really get demolished. This is not our problem. The problem is, like in Georgia and probably in Morocco, the huge transformations and what's there. In some cases, you can even recognize from the beginning. So this is the two other problems that affect our social housing. And getting to his question about what was the global thing, I guess all this audience and what was presented here, it gave us a sense of really being into something that it's common. And in some of these examples, said, okay, this I've seen. This could be in a place. And so, and maybe a museum or some kind of museum or some kind of space.
Global housing museum.
Yeah, where we could. Good idea. I thought
we'll
about.
We'll have an enormous argument where it's going to be.
And the web. I don't know. I guess this is the heritage that we have. Not probably the buildings. Very little people can really go to there and leave the spaces and get their experience, except the ones in Germany that are really well kept, and they've become a tourist attraction. In the other cases, we have to find means of publishing and getting all the other people, besides from the architects, to really get involved in that. I think this is something we have to do.
So how do you change the public perception in post-Soviet era Soviet architecture if you have so much of it? Is it even possible?
Can I take this?
Yeah, I should. Don't unplug it.
So how we change public perception?
Yeah, because you have so much of it. It's so prevalent.
Well, I think it's a very complex issue, and I mean the housing issue is one of the facets of this incredible complexity of our condition in of the post-Soviet spaces. So I think, yeah, with progressive politics, it will be possible.
We're back to politics.
Sorry?
We're back to politics.
Yeah. to go to to go to back to politics. That's, I think, the way to change the relations.
Okay. There's a lady at the end. Oh, all right. Yeah, I thought. You got a question?
I didn't know I had a question.
Oh, I thought you still.
Well, I'm from the New York City Housing Authority.
Oh, great.
And I guess I was thinking for a while about why preserve public housing. Why do we feel so strong about preserving public housing here in New York City? Why are we different from sometimes our sister agencies around the United States? We've only taken down 2 buildings in all these years. We know that the money that comes in from the federal government and the spend that we have contributes $6 billion to the New York City economy. We know that 47% of our families are working families, so we know that we are where jobs live. So low-income jobs, I mean, people don't have to go outside the commuting circle. You know, we have a high degree of educational achievement because we remove families, since families pay no more than 30% of their income for rent. They have money for education and health care. We have campuses that have commercial space, so we have, you know, health clinics, and we have supermarkets and access to transportation. We know that we're providing something very, very vital to keep New York City healthy, and healthy in an environmental way as well, because if we house 1 out of every 8 New Yorkers. So if we have all those households and we have a campaign where we're switching out the light bulbs or doing all kinds of energy preservation, and we're implementing green roofs and stuff like that, we're helping the world economy because we're creating less of a drain on the overall environment. You know, less than 10% of our families are on public assistance. So we have a lot of seniors, and the thing that we're struggling with right now is lower subsidies from the federal government, because we're spitting in the wind compared to what's happening with the other housing authorities. And we know that we have the demographics of our population are changing dramatically. We have growing seniors, and we have to figure out how to keep them from being institutionalized prematurely, and be able to prepare and right-size apartments for the next generation when the number of the family composition changes. But I'd just like to applaud our sister agencies from around the country. Many of them have come to visit us, and we haven't been allowed to go overseas too much, but we hope to in the future.
Thank you. Yeah. Liz, the lady in the back.
What I see from the array of ideas that you've been exposed to is that one dominant thing, you cannot avoid the political question. I mean, if you go from the basic notion of housing as a human right to the various forms of housing around the world today, it is from the most severe situation to the situation which the lady has just explained. The notion of public housing is a tool of government. It's a form of social control in terms of giving a certain expression or to an area that the government wants to preserve as housing, whether it's all New York City or whether it's some encampment out in the boonies somewhere. But the notion of public housing is not an evil one. I think what happens, any government has a responsibility to provide and take care of its people in health, education, and shelter. Otherwise, it's not a government. But that's the greater question. But what I don't understand, from coming back to the micro level where you're showing different housing estates and so forth, how do you prevent housing estates from looking either like barracks or some kind of encampment, whether it's 20 stories or 2 stories? There's some commonality amongst all the work that's presented that doesn't give any sort of an ethical feeling about the design of public housing. I'm not talking private. Thank you.
I think that is an extremely difficult question. And Diane, I was thinking that you showed some examples where clearly premier architects were involved. So the desire was to create more than just encampments, I think is the word you used. So why not? Why can't we see that?
Well, I mean, in the Cumbernauld example that I showed you, it was given a rather privileged position in that it was funded directly from the state and not from the local authority. It was given more money per person, more money per square metre. It had higher rents, and in a way it was quite an elite programme, but it was to create a new community, and it was very successful in that, I would say, up until the 1980s. And the financial, there are, like Joseph said, there are many reasons for the failures of the social housing programme. But what's very interesting, just one point, is that when Cumbernauld began, there was 90% was public housing, locally rented, and 10% private. And when Margaret Thatcher brought in the right to buy, Cumbernauld pioneered the right to buy in Scotland. And so it was a more kind of aspirant residents who used all their savings and bought their houses. And even as public housing and as privately owned housing, the stigma attached to the design of the town come mainly from architects and people like Prince Charles. It's made no difference really about that. You know, the idea is that they were looking for someone to blame, and I think architects chose previous architects to blame, and that's what seems to have happened, but it's much more complex than that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Dirk, you want to try this?
Yeah, we'll go on.
One of the things, at least, well, let me talk for the Dutch context. One of the things, we are a very Protestant country. When you think about post-war building, there was a different value put on aesthetics, very different value than we put on aesthetics these days. There was little money available that was put into redistribution of good housing possibilities there to afford, to make affordable housing possible. So when you, well, I don't want to talk about Prince Charles, so that's too easy. But let's do that with the drinks. But it's
monstrous carbuncle.
It's yeah. So this is really, yeah, it's in the end, it's also an ethical question, but I think we have to understand when we look at the aesthetics of those historical projects, it was a different period and perhaps a different cultural context. So when you look at the Prudon projects, which I think are now valued in a very different way today than they used to be. But Prudon was impossible in Holland as an approach, and all you could say that for all sorts of so within the welfare states, a project or the post-war housing as a global phenomenon, there are all sorts of cultural and local differences that you have to take into account. And it is my own experience that when you carefully look at the various projects, even though they look the same from a distance, when you look at them, how the Western garden cities are being built and planned, it's very different from the way, even within Amsterdam, the northern part of Amsterdam is planned, or the Bijlmermeer was planned. And also when you have to start to replan those neighborhoods, you then start to understand it, because you have to take out little bits or bigger bits, and then you start to understand that these compositions of or encampments are actually much more intricate and better thought out than the outward appearance may suggest.
But isn't the examples that you showed in Casablanca, where you showed the example as originally designed with all the original color schemes on it versus what it evolves, is the evolved example less of an encampment? Less of an encampment? Is it better? Is it more personal? Is that away from the concern that was being asked?
You mean the example of the building that are built now?
Yeah.
Actually, there is not really social housing. There is what we call economical housing. If I translate, it's not.
It's about affordability.
No, it's not something. No, defense is not something done by an authority, public authority. It's something that's done to be sold to the owners.
I see.
So there is kind of tax exemptions when you build housing of 50 square meters unit, and you have to sell them under $30,000 the unit. And it can be the state or the private sector, but there's a great attachment to the ownership. I mean, we don't believe in renting something.
Right.
So there is, I mean, in terms of urban aspect, the same, except that there is not like a common authority to talk to. And so the public spaces are managed or not managed, depending on the inhabitants of the spirit of the inhabitant, etc. And what's weird now, there's a lot of debates in newspaper, etc. about we're doing the mistake that Europe did, that France did a few years ago. There's lots of discussion on locally, saying, okay, we have a lack of 800,000 units in Morocco, and we have to build up to 100,000 units a year. Now we're reaching like 40,000 units. So you imagine the quantity. Yeah. So it's more about discussion, more about not what we're doing. Are we doing the same mistake that Europe did? And maybe this kind of demolition of the building, maybe we're going to have to demolish them in like 30 years.
All right, 2 more questions because it's getting pretty late in the day. Helen.
Thank you. I'd like to ask if people... this way? Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. I have an advisor. He said I wasn't speaking close enough to the microphone. Very simply, on the issue of accretions and resident changes, shall we say, the regal proposition that age value matters and it should be part of the restoration. Is there a view amongst you, is there a debate in Flavia, if I may use your first name, proposes that accretion is part of the restoration because the original state never really existed except in photography and with all its tricks. So, what is there a view amongst you about this accretion, the age value additions and its conservation in a rehabilitation project? And if you had a view, did it change today as a result of it being debated here?
Flavia, this one was handed to you.
We know her view. I'd like to know if other people believe that accretions is very simple, very direct, very tailed. Do you believe that accretions should be conserved?
Changes.
All right.
Addition. So in the Georgian example, should we keep all these things?
I think this is somehow linked with the previous question also when we were talking about aesthetics and encampment and so on, because actually the feeling of encampment comes also perhaps from the regulations that you're just condemned to live in a certain designer-designed building and you cannot change anything. So you're like, okay, it doesn't matter how beautiful the building is. If you're living there for the whole life and you're not even allowed to build your own balcony if you wish so, that creates some, discomfort, if I may say so. So In that sense, when we are talking about this housing project as an encampment, I think the additions that came in late 80s and in 90s in Georgia, for instance, to this building created a lot of, I mean, depends how you look at the aesthetics. Perhaps for someone who looks from outside, it looks awful to look at these buildings, but it improved in some way the needs, and it responded to the needs of local inhabitants, so they're pretty happy with the additions. Well, there is only technical question, because in some cases they were done in a very low quality manner that created some threat for the inhabitant. That's another issue. And when we are now looking at these buildings which are fully converted, and to some architects or art historian or a foreigner, they may look ugly, but for the locals it's their own identity, their own home, and they like it as it is actually. So I like the idea which you raised actually, that we are preserving them as it is now, and we are not trying to bring them back to the previous state, because it's part of the process also. Each building has its building stages, and if we look at the earlier examples, for instance, we who are experts of conservation of earlier periods, we know that in buildings there are many layers of development. If we are respecting the layer of 19th century, so why shouldn't we respect the layers of later editions? So, I mean, it's it doesn't. I mean, it comes for certain needs, and when it's based on the social needs, I think it often happens. At least in our case, we had the. I mean, through my experience, I know we had many debates with local inhabitants in the historic city of Tbilisi, for instance, which is now converted in this multifamily apartments, this 19th century palace-looking building, and we had many debates about this, because they are blaming conservationists to be an elite group who is trying to keep certain rules, well, they have own needs. And the people are coming and saying, look, I just want the toilet in my apartment, and I will add it, and I don't care if you will not like it. So, I mean, these are the questions that the conservationists have to take into account when judging whether they have to keep the design or not keep the design. It's all about the lives of people, so that should be taken into account.
I think we shouldn't go. We shouldn't close ourselves in a disciplinary discourse, and I think the best case of the preservation of these buildings would be the social and economic development of their inhabitants, and also this relates to the previous question about ghettoization and how we prevent marginalization. I think bringing urbanity in these spaces, I don't know, it can be different strategies, like densifying, putting production into this, back to the city, or some alternative practices which can make these spaces not very homogeneous and not diverse and dynamic. And I think that will be the best cases of the preservation. Yeah.
All right, you have the last question.
I'm wondering if at the opposite end of the barracks problem is the building as the fabulous original high-end architectural oddball creation, which almost inherently stigmatizes people in it just because it's very different from everything around it. And I want to bring up the example of the most expensive building in New York now, the new one by Robert Stern at Central Park West and 63rd, is it? It looks exactly like other old buildings, except he jacked up the standards of what's inside of it. It has higher ceilings than any of the older traditional apartment houses that the wealthy live in, and it has bigger windows than any of those other ones. And it did this without looking like a flying saucer has landed in the neighborhood. And is there, sometimes you can just pick out right away which building in town is the oddball that had some good intentions about social design, attached. And maybe those are the examples that architects love, but those are the ones that don't really have too much potential to be saved so that somebody could use them again in the future.
I think that the 63rd Street example for Robert Stern is hardly public housing. It's maybe, as Mayor Koch would say, you and I cannot afford to live there. So I think that, well, I understand, I understand. Ed, your last one is yours. Use both.
Thank you.
Use both mics.
Early this morning, someone showed images of, I think, Pruitt-Igoe and also of Cabrini Green, both which have been demolished. And I'm aware of other ones that have been demolished as well in Connecticut. I'm just sort of wondering, what caused those buildings to go wrong, or those sites to go wrong, and led? Was there a tipping point of something that led to their ultimate demolition? And if so, are there any lessons to be learned that can be better applied toward the preservation of other public housing sites?
Elizabeth, I think.
Well, I mean, I think that's a lot of what we talked about today, and I think Joseph did a good job of outlining the fact that for too long, architects have even taken this. I believe that architecture was so in love with Le Corbusier's vision of a new world that the architecture profession took on the guilt of public housing. I think they said the buildings did it, and I think in part that was a little bit of an ego. Like architecture doesn't have that power. There's no way, you know. Architecture was a factor, but so was race was a huge factor, and that's something we haven't talked a lot about today. Both Joseph and I referenced it, but in the United States, public housing initially was explicitly segregated, and then once it was forced to be integrated, then it was the vast majority. Then it remained segregated actually for a long time, and then has mentally become associated with African Americans, although that's not true. But so race is a huge factor in that question, and it's incalculable for the United States. But I mean, in the case of Cabrini, it was a land grab. It's next to the Gold Coast. I mean, that's the reason that happened. And then the movie Candyman didn't help. But anyway.
All right. It's all about architecture and politics. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all your attention.
Before you go, I want us to give a round of applause specifically to Theo, because this great day would not have happened without Theo. So,
well, thank you very much.